Until 2022, Russia's web of alliances looked unbreakable. Armenia was protected under Moscow's security umbrella. Central Asian presidents were deferential, and mercenaries advanced Moscow's reach across Africa. Since the invasion of Ukraine, that empire is fracturing. Armenia froze its CSTO ties in 2024, and Kazakhstan publicly rejected Russia's land grabs. Regional leaders are increasingly defying Moscow. Deals are being inked with France and India, and Russian influence is quietly draining away. What is actually causing these partners to back away, and how deep does the unraveling go? In February 2024, Armenia took the unprecedented step of freezing its participation in the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan announced the decision publicly, describing the organization as a threat to Armenia's security and sovereignty. This was not a sudden move, but the culmination of years of frustration. When Azerbaijani forces advanced into Armenian territory in 2022 and again in 2023, Armenia's repeated appeals for military support from the organization went unanswered. Russian peacekeepers stationed in Nagorno-Karabakh remained inactive, even as Armenian villages faced attacks. The alliance that once promised protection offered only statements of concern and condolences, a pattern that highlighted the organization's inaction. By late 2023, Armenia had already recalled its permanent representative to the Collective Security Treaty Organization and stopped attending joint drills. The government signaled its intent by refusing to approve or finance the organization's 2024 budget. In May, the Armenian Foreign Ministry reaffirmed the halt in payments and condemned the organization's inaction. Parliamentary testimony and public reports from Armenia's intelligence service made clear that a return to the alliance was not expected in 2025, and that the bloc's credibility was in question. Russia's foreign ministry, meanwhile, insisted that Armenia remained a member on paper, but acknowledged that non-payment meant exclusion from decision-making. Armenia's security establishment did not simply walk away from Moscow's umbrella. They began building new defenses elsewhere. In the spring and summer of 2024, contracts were signed with India for Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launchers and Konkurs M anti-tank guided missiles. French deals followed, bringing Airbus helicopters, Mistral air defense systems, and new small arms. Armenian units retrained with Indian instructors, while French military advisors arrived in Yerevan to oversee helicopter and artillery integration. This process showed a deliberate move toward diversification of suppliers and partners. These new systems required a complete overhaul of Armenia's military doctrine and logistics, breaking decades of dependence on Russian equipment and training. The technical and organizational changes were deep, from spare parts and ammunition to maintenance and command procedures. That practical burden reinforced political distance from Moscow. The shift went beyond arms. European Union observers were invited to monitor Armenia's borders, a dramatic signal of trust in Western partners. Government statements and leaked parliamentary debates revealed a rare consensus among Armenia's political elite. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, once seen as a lifeline, had become a liability. For smaller states watching from the sidelines, Armenia's freeze exposed the limits of Moscow's security guarantees. The organization's authority, once anchored by Russia's promise of intervention, now looked hollow. Armenia's break is not just a regional story. It is a warning to others who once relied on Moscow's protection. Kazakhstan's president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, stood beside Vladimir Putin at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in June 2022 and made his position clear. When pressed on Russia's annexations in Ukraine, Tokayev rejected recognition outright, citing the United Nations Charter and Kazakhstan's commitment to territorial integrity. The statement was broadcast live, an unmistakable signal to Moscow and the world. In the months that followed, Russia responded with customs slowdowns and border trade friction, but stopped short of open retaliation. Kazakhstan, meanwhile, accelerated its search for new partners. Turkish Bayraktar drones arrived in 2023, marking a break from decades of exclusive reliance on Russian military hardware. Defense officials signed expanded training agreements with Ankara and began joint exercises with Turkey and the European Union, even as CSTO participation quietly decreased. Economic data tells the same story. By 2024, Russia's share of Kazakhstan's exports had dropped below 30%, while trade with China and the European Union surged. New grain terminals and pipeline projects bypassed Russian territory, linking Kazakh producers directly with Chinese and European markets. High-level visits between Astana and Beijing increased, and Kazakhstan joined regional infrastructure deals that prioritize eastward and southward ties over the traditional northward routes to Russia. Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan followed similar paths. Uzbekistan's government abstained from United Nations votes on Ukraine and expanded defense procurement from Turkey and China. Trade data from 2025 shows Russia's share of Uzbek exports falling below 18%, while China's rose above 28%. Kyrgyzstan, long dependent on Russian remittances, shifted labor agreements toward Turkey and the Gulf, and received Turkish drones for its armed forces. Even Tajikistan, historically cautious, declined to endorse Russian actions and signed a border accord with Kyrgyzstan and Ankara, with no Russian mediation. None of these states openly confront Moscow, but none have recognized Russian territorial claims in Ukraine or offered support for the war. Instead, they hedge, balancing diplomatic statements, diversifying arms and trade, and quietly reducing their exposure to Russian pressure. In Central Asia, the pattern is not a dramatic rupture, but a steady, deliberate distancing. Tokayev's public stance is only the most visible example of a broader regional calculation. Maintain autonomy, avoid entanglement, and keep options open in a world where Moscow's guarantees no longer carry the same weight. Iran's Shahed drones became a lifeline for Russia's war machine as early as the summer of 2022. Hundreds of these loitering munitions, shipped covertly by companies linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, arrived in Russian hands by the fall of 2022. Within months, Russian engineers began reverse engineering the technology, rolling out their own Guran 2 models from domestic assembly lines. Technical teams from both countries met repeatedly in Moscow and Tehran, hashing out the details of part supply, training, and software integration. By mid-2024, Russian production of Guran 2s was running at scale, but the relationship remained uneasy. Iranian state media and military officials, some speaking off the record, voiced frustration at what they saw as a one-way transfer. Russian promises of advanced fighter jets and missile technology often stalled, leaving Tehran with little more than diplomatic support during its own standoffs with Israel. Iranian analysts accused Moscow of exploiting sanctions pressure to drive a hard bargain, while Russian logistics officers pointed to delays and quality issues in Iranian shipments. The partnership, essential on the battlefield, is defined by calculation and suspicion rather than trust. For both sides, the drone pipeline is a matter of necessity, not loyalty, a stark contrast to the deepening military ties and economic realignments taking place elsewhere. Serbia's relationship with Russia has long been shaped by shared history and deep energy ties, but those bonds have been tested by the realities of European integration. In 2023, the European Union imposed sanctions on NIS, Serbia's main oil refinery, which is majority owned by Russia's Gazprom Neft. The move forced Belgrade into a difficult position. President Aleksandar Vučić, under pressure from EU negotiators, accepted the sanctions despite fierce criticism from nationalist factions at home. Internal EU documents later leaked, and they revealed that Serbia's accession talks would stall indefinitely unless Belgrade aligned with EU energy policy. The NIS sanctions cut off Russian crude, driving up domestic energy costs and exposing Serbia's dependence on Russian supplies. In response, the Serbian government began to diversify its defense and energy partners. For the first time, Serbia signed contracts for Western arms, including French Mistral air defense systems and German-made rifles. These deals were more than symbolic. They signaled a willingness to prioritize EU membership over traditional alliances. Energy data from 2024 shows a sharp drop in Russian oil imports, with Serbia sourcing more from the Mediterranean and Central Europe. Diplomatic cables from Brussels make clear that further integration depends on continued alignment with EU sanctions. For Vučić, the calculus is pragmatic. Serbia's future lies with Europe, even if it means quietly stepping back from Moscow's embrace. The pressure is economic, but the consequences are geopolitical. In the Balkans, even Russia's closest partners are making hard choices. The Wagner mutiny in 2023 sent shockwaves through Russia's African network. Overnight, contracts that had once been handled by personal connections and cash payments fell into uncertainty. In the Central African Republic and Mali, government officials pressed Moscow for guarantees, worried that the men guarding presidential palaces and gold mines might suddenly disappear or switch sides. Leaked documents from early 2024 reveal a scramble to rewrite security agreements, Wagner's name replaced by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and a new entity, the Africa Corps, stamped at the bottom. Some African leaders hesitated, demanding proof that Moscow could still deliver on promises of protection and arms. In Bangui and Bamako, rumors circulated of offers from China and the Gulf if Russian support faltered. The Africa Corps deployed in larger numbers, but supply lines stretched thin, and the aura of reliability that Wagner once projected had fractured. Russia's grip in Africa now depends on renegotiated deals and the willingness of local regimes to gamble on a new, less certain partner. Russian energy exports to Europe have collapsed, with revenues dropping by more than 60% between 2021 and 2023. The sudden loss of core European markets forced Moscow to redirect oil and gas flows eastward, but the replacement has come at a steep cost. China now accounts for a record share of Russian trade, with bilateral commerce surpassing $240 billion in 2023. Russian planners face a new reality, dependence on a single buyer with enormous leverage. While Moscow touts its deepening ties with China, Iran, and North Korea, this compact bloc is not a formal alliance, and analysts describe it as a network of necessity, not trust. For now, Russia's influence narrows around a hardening core, but the costs of lost markets and strategic autonomy continue to mount, leaving the long-term future unresolved. As Russia's alliances contract, the world's balance of power shifts in real time. Former partners now hedge their bets, redrawing old maps of loyalty. The consequences will not just shape Moscow's future, they will echo across borders, alliances, and crises for years to come. What do you think happens next?